Spilling the beans on the conspiracy, why and how grand conspiracies can and do exist. Recently, I've been hearing a few of my favorite Christian apologists during their podcasts dismiss conspiracy and conspiracy theories, often citing the work of former police homicide investigator and thinker, Christian apologetics author J. Warner Wallace, and his supposition that true or real conspiracies are almost always just too difficult to pull off because of the vast numbers of people who need to be involved in them to succeed in getting away with them. And there is such a propensity of the people involved in a conspiracy to spill the beans. The more people involved and the bigger the conspiracy, the more likely that the beans will be spilled, the theory states. This idea is, at best, an illustration of our gullible nature and our inclination to ignorantly and innocently wrap up our desired, comfortable, willful ignorance in the facade of intellectualism. To quickly address some of those suppositions, I'll point out that yes, the proverbial beans have been spilled quite often throughout history, and quite famously in many, many instances. And I will make the case that the propensity, or the force among us, to spill the beans, to expose a conspiracy, are the exact same kinds of propensities or forces that drive conspirators to actually cover up their crimes, or to conspire. Of course, conspiracies happen all of the time. Two or more people working together in secret to attain a specific desired goal is a part of life. But I'm talking of the more grand and more well-known kinds of nefarious conspiracies that we all are aware of. The simple and one-dimensional argument put forth by the likes of Wallace and his followers, in essence co-conspirators of willful ignorance themselves, is seriously flawed, in that it kind of presupposes that these conspiracies occur in some kind of vacuum or bubble, or that they just simply fall from people's brains, or are born out of some simple-minded conspiring person or group of people, much like some kind of stillborn fatherless baby that has no power or influence in the world. It kind of frustrates me that I have to feel compelled to lay this all out, because to me, and to a gloriously ever-growing number of people, it seems so commonsensical and logical. But since even some of my favorite Christian thinkers and apologists either can't, or at least don't want to, connect these kinds of obvious logical dots because it is more comfortable for them, for the sake of my fellow truth-seeking brethren, I guess I must. Of course, the Bible is filled with conspiracies. Starting, historically speaking, when one of God's created head angels, or archangels, and 1/3 of his other angels did something conspiratorial to get themselves tossed from God's domain, heaven, in the grandest of ways. The effects of this grand conspiracy then moving onward in time to two of God's first created beings on earth, made in his image, mankind, conspiring with a serpent to try and become morally their own gods by eating that forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. This idea might seem archaic or just fairy tale-like, but the record of it is what God wants us, right now, to take hold of or understand from it. As C.S. Lewis famously came to conclude, it is all a myth, but it is God's myth. A myth isn't necessarily not true. As Christian thinker Dr. William Lane Craig describes it, something described as a myth specifically means it is a narrative device that we use in such a way that we can ground something seemingly mysterious or not handily explainable to our current perceptions of reality. I'm sure that the ins and outs and the juicy details of this story, or myth, are things we might have someday revealed to us, and I'm quite sure that they are anything but archaic or fairy tale-like. The grandest of conspiracies then moves on to the one in Genesis chapter 6, where the fallen angels were somehow tinkering with mankind's DNA to try to create a new creature that the tossed archangel could try to be lord over. And Lucifer's conspiracy to do exactly this still goes on to this day. None of these three conspiracies worked out very well for Lucifer or for man, not yet anyways. We are still in the throes of this grand ongoing conspiracy, and understanding the powers behind it all goes an awful long way toward us understanding why and how the current nefarious conspiracies have actually happened, and a huge way toward understanding this crazy-seeming world. The coming and undeniable apocalypse is more fitting of this definition. Apocalypse, apocalypsis, is a Greek word meaning revelation, an unveiling or unfolding of things not previously known, and which could not be known apart from the unveiling. Perhaps the most compelling reason to believe in the powers of this grand conspirator is because Jesus did. When Jesus was taken to the earthly mountaintop and had to him offered up by Satan, in essence the deal, all of this and much more can be yours if you kneel down and worship me. Jesus' response can help us in this kind of revelation. First of all, Jesus never denied that Satan was the Lord over, though be it temporary, all the things of this earth. And I'll remind that the name Satan was given to Lucifer after his fall from God's presence. That is why the two names are often heard interchangeably. And Lucifer lords also over what many Hebraic-thinking people would call the second heaven, mostly the invisible or non-physical realm that we don't currently have the physical ability to sense or see. Probably why Lucifer, or the accuser Satan, is known as the prince of the air. But secondly, and more importantly to this discussion, Lucifer, who we now know is a conspirator with men, does just that. Would we be naive enough not to believe that Lucifer has offered up that same exact deal to other mere mortal men throughout history? Men who have decided that they want to have the unlimited power and riches of the world and worship Lucifer. Of course they have, and of course they still do. And so do the families that really run this world. We know of some, but probably not all of them. Many of them are still trying to be their own gods, and even live forever. A subject for a later time. Having an inexhaustible source of power through what we call money is a very effective and efficient means towards keeping people from spilling the beans on their mission of continuing the grand conspiracy and Lucifer worship, as I will now get into. For starters, any true and real conspiracy is never successfully carried off until all of the actors, agents, or players are seriously vetted, controlled, and trusted by the actors or agents above them. This I will get into in a bit. Much could be cited about the exposure or the disclosure to us all about how all of that works, through what is presented to us in the fictional movies, books, and TV shows that we watch or have watched or read over the years. The expression or ongoing question, does art imitate life or does life imitate art, is a conspiracy all of its own to dissuade us from believing our own lying eyes, or at least we are trained to not believe our eyes. This, in regards to our knowledge of conspiracy that we are educated about, in the face of organized crime and their famous mafia-like tactics, and how it relates to or is married to political corruption. But I digress. Yes, art imitates life. Do we really need to wonder? And I have often made the point that truth is always stranger than fiction. This because truth is not bound by the creative brains or creative powers of one or two or a single group of people, but rather, it is the collective result of all of humanity's glorious and almost unlimited creative powers throughout time. This, in God's image creative power, sometimes used for good and oftentimes used for evil, but is undeniably, collectively and gloriously strange. Now let's take a quick look at how exactly it is that these co-conspirators are actuated, or how they are weaned into or caressed, fostered or bred or brought up into being the kind of conspirators who won't and often don't spill the beans. It is quite obvious that corruptible people or people who are apt to commit conspiracies or acts of corruption rise up through their ranks much like pond scum does over the top of a swamp, or how the cream of the crop rises in. What exact kind of crop is another question. This, from the top and traveling downward, corruption force is quite logical. Anything that would be considered a political power or business power, or any power that is what you would call non-kinetic energy, or human power or force, always travels in that direction. It was the American Constitution and Bill of Rights that was really the only counter to that natural occurring and always historically evidenced phenomenon. The Bill of Rights and Constitution and what they represent were that glorious other, almost totally unsustainable, on this earth, truth from God that said, all men are created equal. The Revolutionary War was God's people working in God's kingdom. This, all men are created equal. Truth is one of the things that the grand conspirator hates and is in a quest to conspire against, and always has and always will. After all, how can mere men all be equal and be Lucifer's underlings, if God, the Creator, already told Satan that he is inferior to man? Perhaps this is what led to his grand conspiracy and his being ousted from God's domain. But this is just pure logical conjecture on my part. I'm not at all saying that anyone who rises up through their ranks of their profession or occupation is corrupt. But what I am saying is that wherever there is corruption, there is this operating paradigm at work to identify, control, and advance corruptible conspirators into positions to successfully conspire. And then, ultimately, for the greatest Lucifer worshippers to go on into the grand conspiracy. Of course, many upper-level conspirators learn how to play the game early, through familial training and/or in college. In those esoteric and occult fraternities or societies, these leg-up college graduates can be inserted very easily, efficiently and quickly into the higher positions, in the spots or positions that conspiracy perpetrators can be very, very profitable in, to then serve their pledged to Lodge's Lord Lucifer. With that understanding, it is also easy to see that nobody rises up to the next level of corruption until they pass certain tests on the lower level. The recruitment amongst the unwashed masses begins with coded language presented in casual conversations that only the kinds of personalities that have a propensity to want to be corrupt and corruptible conspirators can hear and respond to. I guess if a human dog whistle existed, this would be the one. They, the grand conspirators, would know all about dog whistles. Here would be a great place to point out one of a conspirator's trusted tools, or at least one they like to use. That to me seems a pathetic juvenile tool. This tool called projection, where a conspirator projects or accuses the things that they do onto their threatening detractors or their enemies. We see this all the time. I believe the name, Satan, even comes from the word that means the accuser. But now, to be brief in explaining the how or the why that conspirators can be quite successfully enticed into not spilling the beans, I'll include this short excerpt from another write that I entitled "Thank God for Worthless Currency," in which it explains how there is this sick, yet efficient working monetary system that the evil powers of the world use to do their business of Lucifer worship. And it even explains the whole Jeffrey Epstein bean spill. Of course, there are some rare exceptions, but for the most part, their currency seems to be bribery, blackmail, payoffs, coercion, compromise, and hits. Hence, their currency trading is one of, he has dirt on me, so I have dirt on you. So you will do the despicable, compromising things as I tell you to do them. That way, nobody gets hurt. Public disgrace or death, it doesn't just happen in the mafia or in the movies. Art does imitate life. And of course, as the general population becomes more and more morally bankrupt, then the level of disgusting dirt that needs to be held over the heads of one of these currency traders becomes more and more depraved. This, I think, speaks to the totally evil and disgustingly depraved satanic rituals and pedophilia that are being exposed by WikiLeaks. These include child rape sacrifice in satanic rituals, not to mention unspeakable sexual acts on children and adults alike. Perhaps the 460,000 plus US children a year that go missing. Yes, you heard that right. That's like 1 in 92 American children under the age of 18 that are reported as missing. Look into this ghastly number. How many of these do you suppose are being used in satanic pedophilia rituals? Under that described working system, it's quite easy to see how the Lucifer worshippers can, throughout history, ascend through the described corruption to owning and controlling all of information or mainstream education, all of mainstream media, of course, including much of the controlled, censored, and algorithmic internet, all of banking, and all of big pharma and medicine, on and on. And it is not at all hard to see how the grand conspiracy, with all of its smaller conspiracies, can be pulled off, right in the face of many, many gullible, blindly trusting mainstream media, mainstream fake news, and mainstream educated, informed people. People oftentimes informed by prostituting themselves to the grand conspirator, knowingly or even unwittingly, in the name of physical, financial, or even emotional comfort. These intellectuals or informed people go on to say things like, grand conspiracies could never be successfully pulled off. But, in glorious working in the kingdom of God-like fashion, the apocalypse of more and more beans being spilled is coming into fruition. Are we ready for this coming apocalypse? I know that my truth-seeking brethren are very much ready. Praise the Lord.